Howdy folks, and welcome to the Hillbilly Kitchen. Today we're making chip beef and gravy, creamed chip beef, or if you were in the Navy, maybe you called it something else. But this is a really simple, really old recipe, makes a quick dinner, quick easy breakfast, or a nice hot lunch. And what we need is some chip beef, and I have about 2.5 ounces of sliced dried chip beef here. And you need a little bit of fat. I've got about 1/2 tablespoon of butter. You can use a little bit of leftover bacon grease, and you can use a little more fat in it if you want to. That's entirely up to you. To make the gravy, I've got about 1.3 cups of milk or so. You're going to want a cup or a little bit more milk. About 2 tablespoons of flour. You definitely are going to want some black pepper in this. And if you want a little extra seasoning in it, you can do onion powder and a dash of Worcestershire sauce. Those are both optional. This is all you actually need to make this. So I'm going to get my skillet warmed up here and throw my butter in it and get it melting. And while that's going on, I'm going to slice my beef up, because you don't want to put it in here like this. You want to chip it. And what this was originally made out of was a chunk of dried beef, I'm sure, that was chipped, thus the name chipped beef. And they would shave little bits of it off. But since we have sliced, we're going to cut it in little bits. This recipe became really, really popular during WW2 and in American homes after that. You used to be able to get it in the frozen food section, and it would come in a little boiling bag thing. You can't even get it anymore. And then, of course, the boiling bag was microwavable after everybody started getting microwaves. But this used to be in the frozen food section, already made chip beef and gravy. And it was one of the things that I craved when I was expecting my first child. You crave some strange stuff. So me and this recipe go a long way back. I'm going to go ahead and add my flour in here. Now, whenever you're making gravy or cream sauce with flour, you want to cook your flour a little bit. If you don't cook your flour a little bit, your finished gravy, you will taste that in it, the raw flour. And you don't want to taste the flour. You want to taste the chip beef, the pepper. If you're using a dash of Worcestershire, you want to be able to taste that. And the onion powder. And I'm going to go ahead and put my onion powder in there, because what that's going to do is it's going to give it kind of the flavor of caramelized or toasted onions. And let that cook. All right. And we can go ahead and put a little pepper in there. And all this stuff is to taste, the pepper and the onion powder. If you use the Worcestershire, I probably used, I don't know, 1/4 teaspoon. And this 2 ounces, you can make more gravy in it if you have more people to feed. You could make up to 2 cups of gravy, and it would make a lot more creamed beef to go on your toast. If you're having this for breakfast, you could serve eggs with it, or if you're having it for dinner, you could serve eggs with it, maybe some hash browns. You could do potatoes with it at dinner time, any kind. You could even serve it over a pile of mashed potatoes instead of over toast, or over pasta or rice, and then have some sort of vegetable with it if you're having it for dinner. This is one of those struggle foods, the hard times foods. And like I said, it became really, really popular during and after WW2. The soldiers coming back wanted it at home after they came back. And it was one of the foods that you could get when there was shortages, kind of like what we have going on now. Only it was way worse then than it is now. Now I'm going to add my milk into my flour, and I'm going to stir that until my flour dissolves. Now this is also sometimes called stewed chipped beef, and we're going to throw this chipped beef in here, kind of separate it a little bit so it's not in big chunks. And we're going to let it sit in our gravy so that the flavor gets in our gravy. And as this milk comes to a boil, as it heats up, the flour that we put in there will dissolve, and you will not have lumps in your gravy if you stir it. Now, if your gravy comes out too thick because you got too much flour in it, or it just comes out too thick for whatever reason, if it's cooked for a while, it'll thicken up. If you want to thin it out, simply add a little more milk to it. But if your gravy's too thin, don't add more flour to it. Just cook it a little bit longer and it'll thicken up. If you add flour to the milk once it gets hot, it will not dissolve. And it will take just a second for your brown flour to dissolve. Don't panic, it'll dissolve. But if you add it once that milk's hot, it's not going to. We just got little bitty pieces of flour left in there now, and it'll continue to dissolve as our milk heats up. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to add in our beef. And if you want a little dash of Worcestershire sauce in there, you can put a little dash of Worcestershire in there. It's, you know, entirely optional. And we're just going to stir this like we would any other gravy. And white gravy, milk gravy, is cream sauce. It's the same thing. So if something says it's in a cream sauce, it's just gravy, just milk gravy. Thicken it with a little flour. You can even thicken it with a little cornstarch. This recipe, though, I think was probably made with flour. If you do need a gluten-free version, though, add a little cornstarch to your cold milk. You would only want about a tablespoon of cornstarch, where we use 2 tablespoons of flour. And that'll give you a gluten-free white gravy or gluten-free cream sauce, gluten-free milk gravy. But we're just going to stir it, like I said, until it comes to a boil and our gravy thickens. You do want to cook this on kind of medium-low heat. And I know I'm going to have comments about my fork and my skillet. This metal fork is not going to hurt this iron skillet. I've had this skillet for 38, 39 years now. It was a wedding gift from my husband. And I was a very young bride, and I have been using a fork in it since I got it. And my granny always used forks and stuff in hers, so it's not going to hurt it. I know some folks just, they panic when they see a fork in an iron skillet, but that iron skillet is much tougher than this stainless steel fork. This is one of those recipes, like I said, it was born in pretty tough times. The whole world had gone through the biggest conflict to date, and still the biggest conflict to date. A lot of folks were afraid that it was the end of the world, and times were just really, really, really uncertain, even more uncertain than they are now. And there were a lot of shortages. There were things you just couldn't get, things you just couldn't do. And people were far closer to God then than they are now. Our grandmothers got through those times making recipes like this and leaning on the Lord. And we kind of need to get back to cooking the way our grandmothers did, and we certainly need to get back to trusting God. Nehemiah 1:7 says, "The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knoweth them that trust in him." You know, if you trust in God, he knows you, he is good, and he will take care of you. Our grandmothers knew that, and we need to lean on those promises in the Bible like they did, and we need to pray like they did. And God and these old recipes will get us through what we're going through now. Okay, our gravy is at a full boil, and I'm going to turn it off because we don't want to scorch it. And it's pretty thick. Now, if you want your gravy thinner, you can certainly add more milk to it. If you want it thicker, let it cook a little bit longer. But if you're not used to making cream sauces, milk gravies, and when this starts to cool, it is going to get thicker. And if you cook it until it gets too thick, you're definitely going to end up having to add more milk to it. Now, when I was a kid, my granny would make milk gravy with sausage every morning or with bacon grease. And she would leave it sitting on the stove until lunchtime. And it would literally be so thick you could slice it and pick it up. And she would warm it up. She would add more milk to it and warm it up and serve it for lunch. Not recommended these days, but you can, if you save this leftover, if you have some leftover, you can certainly add a little milk to it to thin it out before you heat it up and serve it. I do recommend putting it in the refrigerator if you have it left over and you want to serve it later. But you can see here when I rake the fork, it kind of, it's thick enough that it like piles up. And it leaves, my fork leaves a trail. You can even see all the way down to the bottom of the pan there when I really rake it. That's as thick as you want it. If you cook it until it gets any thicker than that, it's going to get too thick when it cools. And then you're going to end up having to thin it back out. The basic rule of thumb is approximately 2 tablespoons of flour per cup of milk. Now, I had a little bit more than a cup of milk. I had about 1 1/4 cups. So you might need a little bit more milk with your 2 tablespoons of flour. If you're doing cornstarch, 1 tablespoon of cornstarch per cup of milk. If you're doing flour, you want to put your flour in your pan first, brown it so you don't have that raw flour taste. Then add your cold milk to your pan. If you're using cornstarch, put your cornstarch in your cold milk and stir it up, and then add that to your pan when you're ready to start making your gravy. You know, you can go ahead and put your butter in and your pepper and your onion and whatever. Even go ahead and put your beef in, and then add your milk and your cornstarch mixture to that. So whether you need it with cornstarch or you want to do it with flour, it doesn't matter. It comes out the same way. And like I said, this is one of those really, really old recipes. It's really, really good. It's perfect on a cold day. And it's like the 1st of April. And it is extremely cold here. We actually had snow this morning. It's dogwood winter, and I don't know how far around the world these little mini winters reach, or, you know, if people do it. But the weather changes between seasons, you know, and it'll be like real springy and then it'll get wintry again. And it does the same thing in the fall. It'll get cold and then it gets warm. But all of our little cold snaps are named here. We have dogwood winter, redbud winter, strawberry winter, blackberry winter. And they go way up into spring until summer starts. But there's the weather for the day, and we've had our verse for the day. And I want to thank you so much for joining us, the Hillbilly Kitchen. Try some of these old recipes, and the hamburger gravy is in here linked at the end, so you can click on that. Share our videos with your friends. If you haven't already, don't forget to click like and subscribe. And until next time, remember to put God first.